My name is Jewel, and I'm 63 years old. When my husband Robert passed away 3 years ago, I inherited $53 million that our son Matthew knew nothing about. When he announced his engagement to Allison, something in my gut told me to keep quiet about the money. I continued living in our modest home, driving my 5-year-old car, and wearing the same clothes. Thank goodness I trusted my instincts, because just days after their wedding, Allison showed up at my door with questions that revealed everything. Before I tell you this story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe to hear how money almost destroyed my family. I grew up in a middle-class family in Minnesota, where my father worked as an accountant and my mother taught second grade. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich either. My parents instilled in me the value of hard work, honesty, and living within your means. These values stayed with me throughout my life, even after I met and married Robert during our junior year at the University of Minnesota. Robert was studying computer science when we met in 1982. He was brilliant, kind, and had an entrepreneurial spirit that I admired. After graduation, we moved to Boston, where he joined a small tech startup. I worked as a school counselor, while he put in long hours building his career. We lived in a small apartment, saved what we could, and dreamed about starting a family. In 1990, Robert took a risk that changed our lives. He left his job to start his own software security company, just as the internet was beginning to take off. The timing couldn't have been better. Over the next 35 years, his company grew from a 3-person operation in our garage to a respected name in cybersecurity, with offices in 5 countries. Despite the company's success, we maintained a relatively modest lifestyle. Robert believed that flaunting wealth attracted the wrong kind of people and created unnecessary pressure. We moved into a nice, but not ostentatious home in a good neighborhood. We took vacations, had reliable cars, and never worried about bills, but we weren't living extravagantly by any means. Robert's philosophy was to build wealth quietly and use it wisely. Matthew was born in 1991, our only child after several miscarriages. He grew up with advantages I never had, attending private schools and participating in expensive extracurricular activities. He was a good kid, though sometimes I worried about his sense of entitlement. Robert and I tried to teach him about money management and the importance of hard work. But it's difficult to fully understand those concepts when you've never truly struggled. Matthew graduated from Cornell with a business degree, but struggled to find his path afterward. He tried several jobs and briefly contemplated joining his father's company before deciding corporate life wasn't for him. Instead, he pursued a master's in education and eventually became a high school economics teacher. I was proud of him for choosing a meaningful career over a more lucrative one. When Robert died suddenly from a heart attack 3 years ago, our world shattered. He was only 65, seemingly healthy, and we had been planning our retirement together. Matthew was devastated, having lost not just his father, but also his mentor. The months that followed were a blur of grief, paperwork, and adjusting to life without the man who had been my partner for nearly 4 decades. The biggest shock came when I met with our family lawyer after the funeral. I knew we were financially comfortable, but I had no idea of the true extent of our wealth. Robert had built his company into something far more valuable than I realized. When he sold it 2 years before his death, he walked away with over $50 million. With investments and life insurance, I inherited $53 million. Robert's will was clear about his wishes. The bulk of the estate came to me with provisions for Matthew, to receive his inheritance when he turned 35. Robert believed that by that age, Matthew would have established his own identity and career, making him less likely to be defined by sudden wealth. There were also substantial donations to several educational charities we had supported throughout our marriage. After learning about the inheritance, I made a conscious decision not to significantly change my lifestyle. I stayed in our family home, kept my circle of close friends, and continued the volunteer work that gave my life meaning after retirement from school counseling. The money gave me security and the ability to help others quietly, but I didn't want it to change who I was. Matthew knew we were well off, but had no idea about the true extent of his father's success. Robert had always been private about finances, even with family. I decided to respect his approach and not disclose the full inheritance to Matthew immediately. I would support him when needed, but Robert's plan to wait until Matthew was 35 seemed wise. About 18 months after Robert's death, Matthew called me excitedly to tell me he had met someone special. Her name was Allison, and they had connected at a mutual friend's birthday party. He sounded happier than he had since losing his father, which filled my heart with hope. Perhaps our family was finally heading toward brighter days. I'll never forget the first time I met Allison. Matthew brought her to dinner at my home on a warm spring evening. She arrived wearing an elegant black dress that looked expensive, her blonde hair perfectly styled, and carrying a bottle of wine that I later discovered cost over $100. My initial impression was that she was beautiful, polished, and eager to make a good impression. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you, Mrs. Davis," she said, embracing me with a hug that felt practiced. "Matthew has told me so much about you." During dinner, Allison was charming and attentive. She asked thoughtful questions about Robert, seemed interested in my volunteer work, and laughed at all the right moments when Matthew shared family stories. She explained that she came from a wealthy Connecticut family and had worked in the fashion industry in New York before relocating to Boston for a marketing position at a luxury retail company. "My parents had a summer home in Cape Cod," she mentioned casually. "We spent every August there when I was growing up. Such wonderful memories." Matthew looked at her adoringly throughout the evening, his hand rarely leaving hers. I hadn't seen him this happy in years, and despite a vague uneasiness I couldn't quite place, I was happy for him. The first subtle red flag appeared as Allison helped me clear the dinner plates. "This china is lovely," she remarked, examining one of my plates. "Is it a family heirloom?" "No, just something Robert and I picked up years ago," I replied. "Oh," she said, her smile faltering slightly. "I thought perhaps it was Wedgwood or something special. My mother has the most amazing collection of antique Limoges." It was a small moment, but it struck me as odd that she seemed disappointed my dishes weren't more valuable. Throughout the evening, she made similar comments about my furniture, the neighborhood, and even subtly about my clothing. As the relationship progressed, Matthew began spending more than he previously had. He traded his practical sedan for a luxury car he could barely afford on his teacher's salary. His wardrobe improved dramatically, and he began talking about restaurants and experiences that were well beyond his usual budget. When I gently asked about these changes, he brushed off my concerns. "I'm just enjoying life. A little more, Mom," he said. "Dad would want me to be happy, right?" I wanted to give Allison the benefit of the doubt. Matthew was an adult, and his happiness mattered to me. Perhaps he was just trying to impress his new girlfriend, and things would settle down eventually. But more red flags appeared. At a dinner in my home that fall, I overheard Allison on the phone in the hallway. Her voice had lost its usual warmth and refinement. "No, I haven't figured that out yet," she whispered sharply. "His mother lives modestly, but there has to be money somewhere. The father owned a tech company, for God's sake." She quickly ended the call when she noticed me approaching and transformed back into the charming woman Matthew adored. Our Christmas dinner became another concerning memory. Allison looked around my tastefully decorated but not lavish home and said, "It's so cozy here. Don't you ever think about upgrading to something more substantial? After all, you're all alone in this big house." Matthew looked uncomfortable, but didn't defend our family home. Instead, he changed the subject, shooting me an apologetic glance. I began to notice how he had become more status conscious, occasionally making comments about our modest lifestyle that echoed Allison's sentiments. It was as if he was seeing our comfortable middle-class existence through new, more critical eyes. When Matthew announced their engagement after only 10 months of dating, I was concerned, but tried to support his decision. He was 31, certainly old enough to choose his life partner. But something about the situation continued to trouble me. I did something I never thought I would do. I hired a private investigator to look into Allison's background. It felt invasive and dishonest, but my maternal instinct was screaming that something wasn't right. The initial report revealed concerning discrepancies. Allison had indeed grown up in Connecticut, but in a solidly middle-class town, not the wealthy enclave she described. Her parents were both public school teachers, not the socialites she had portrayed. There was no summer home in Cape Cod. Her employment history showed frequent job changes, not the steady fashion career she claimed. I didn't immediately confront Matthew with this information. I needed more facts before potentially damaging his relationship. But as wedding planning began, my concerns only grew stronger. The wedding planning process revealed even more about Allison's expectations and character. During our first planning meeting, she presented a vision that would cost upwards of $200,000. "I've always dreamed of getting married at the Wentworth Resort," she explained, showing us photos of an exclusive venue overlooking the ocean. "The base package starts at $50,000, but with the additions I want, it'll be closer to $75,000. She continued detailing her plans for designer dresses, exotic flowers flown in from South America, a 10-piece band, and a guest list of 200 people, many of whom Matthew had never even met. I watched my son's expression shift from excitement to anxiety as the estimated costs climbed higher. Later that evening, Matthew called me. "Mom, I know this seems extravagant, but it's Allison's dream wedding," he said. "I was hoping you might be able to contribute more than we initially discussed." I had already offered to pay $40,000 toward the wedding, a substantial but reasonable amount, considering my supposed financial situation. In reality, I could have easily paid for the entire wedding without noticing the expense, but I was becoming increasingly convinced that would be a mistake. "Matthew, I'm contributing what I can comfortably afford," I explained. "Your father and I saved for your wedding, but we never anticipated something quite this elaborate." When I told Allison about my contribution limit at our next planning meeting, her disappointment was palpable. Her smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. "I understand," she said tightly. "We'll just have to see what my parents can add, though they're on a teacher's salary, as you know. Perhaps we can scale back on a few things." But scaling back wasn't what happened. Instead, Matthew began working overtime and dipping into his savings to cover the growing expenses. Each planning meeting became a battleground of passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled disappointment from Allison. "Well, we could go with the cheaper centerpieces," she would sigh. They won't look as elegant in photos, but sometimes we have to compromise. I began wondering about Allison's family's contribution. She frequently mentioned their financial limitations as public school teachers, which contradicted her earlier tales of wealth and privilege. When I gently inquired about their involvement in the planning, Allison became defensive. "They're contributing what they can," she snapped, before quickly composing herself. "But this isn't really their style of wedding. They're more simple people." My private investigator continued his work, and his findings troubled me deeply. Not only had Allison fabricated her wealthy background, but she also had significant debt, including maxed-out credit cards and a defaulted student loan. There was no evidence of the trust fund she had casually mentioned to Matthew. I decided I needed to show Matthew the truth before he made a potentially devastating mistake. I invited him over for dinner alone and gently presented what I had learned. "Matthew, I'm concerned about some inconsistencies in Allison's background." I began showing him the investigator's report. "I'm worried she hasn't been completely honest with you." I expected surprise, or at least concern. Instead, Matthew's face flushed with anger. "You hired someone to spy on her," he demanded. "How could you invade her privacy like this? And mine, I was concerned about you." I tried to explain. The stories weren't adding up. "So she exaggerated about her family's wealth. Who cares? Maybe she was embarrassed," he shot back. "Do you know how many people exaggerate on their resumes or on first dates? It doesn't mean anything." Before I could respond, Matthew stormed out. 3 days later, he returned with Allison, who tearfully confessed to embellishing details about her background. "I was ashamed," she sobbed. "I wanted to fit into Matthew's world. I thought if his family knew I came from nothing, you wouldn't accept me." Matthew put his arm around her protectively. "Mom, Allison has apologized to me, and that's all that matters. We all make mistakes." Then came the ultimatum that broke my heart. "You need to accept Allison and stop digging into her past, or you risk losing me," Matthew said firmly. Dad would have given her a chance. That statement stung more than anything else. Robert would indeed have given anyone a second chance, but he also would have protected our son from potential harm. Still, I nodded and apologized for overstepping, choosing to maintain peace and keep my son in my life. The wedding planning continued, with tensions simmering beneath the surface. I decided to take a step back, limiting my involvement to what was necessary and maintaining my financial boundaries. If Matthew was determined to marry Allison, I would respect his decision while remaining vigilant. As the wedding date approached, I noticed Allison's parents seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the lavish celebrations. They were kind, humble people who looked out of place at the extravagant rehearsal dinner Allison had insisted upon. I wondered if they too had concerns about the match, or if they were simply overwhelmed by the opulence their daughter demanded. The night before the wedding, I lay awake, wondering if I had done everything I could to protect my son while respecting his autonomy. I thought of Robert and what he would have advised. Ultimately, I decided that Matthew needed to make his own choices and learn his own lessons, however painful they might be. I would be there to support him, whatever happened next. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather and all the expensive trimmings Allison had insisted upon. The Wentworth Resort overlooked the Atlantic Ocean, providing a stunning backdrop for the ceremony. Everything was elegant, from the imported flowers to the champagne that flowed freely throughout the reception. If you didn't know the cost, you might have called it tasteful rather than extravagant. I wore a navy blue dress I'd purchased months earlier, elegant but not ostentatious. As mother of the groom, I received many compliments and congratulations. I smiled and thanked everyone, maintaining the composure that had gotten me through the difficult planning process. "Your son looks so happy," friends told me, "and Allison is absolutely radiant." Matthew did look happy, his face glowing as he watched his bride move through the reception. Allison was in her element, graciously accepting compliments on everything from her designer gown to the exquisite table settings she had selected. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed this was the happiest day of her life, too. I noticed Allison's parents standing awkwardly near the bar, looking overwhelmed by the opulence surrounding them. Her father, a math teacher with kind eyes, nodded politely whenever anyone approached. Her mother clutched her small handbag like a lifeline, her smile strained. They were good people who seemed genuinely fond of Matthew, which only made the situation more complicated. During the reception, I went to the ladies' room and overheard a conversation that confirmed my worst fears. Allison was speaking with her maid of honor in hushed but excited tones by the sinks. "Phase 1 complete," Allison laughed, adjusting her veil. "Now, we move on to accessing the family money." Her friend giggled. "Do you think there's as much as you thought? The mother-in-law doesn't exactly scream wealthy." "Trust me, it's there," Allison replied confidently. "Matthew told me his father sold some tech company before he died. They're just hiding it, probably to avoid taxes or something." I slipped into a stall before they noticed me, my heart pounding. In that moment, I made a firm decision. I would never reveal the extent of Robert's estate to Matthew or Allison. The inheritance would remain protected until Matthew reached 35, as Robert had planned. It was no longer just about respecting my late husband's wishes, but about protecting our son from a potential disaster. The couple left for a 2-week honeymoon in the Maldives, another expense that had stretched Matthew's finances to the breaking point. I used that time to meet with our family lawyer to ensure the inheritance was properly protected. I didn't share my specific concerns about Allison, only that I wanted to make absolutely certain Robert's wishes were being followed to the letter. When they returned, tanned and apparently happy, the changes began almost immediately. Allison started talking about houses in Beacon Hill, one of Boston's most exclusive neighborhoods. "We should really get out of that tiny apartment," she told Matthew during dinner at my home. "A married couple needs space to grow. I saw the perfect townhouse yesterday. Only $2.5 million. I watched Matthew's face as he tried to hide his shock at the price tag. That might be out of our range right now, honey." Allison turned to me with a practiced smile. "Jewel, don't you think Matthew deserves to live in a nice neighborhood, especially considering his background?" The implication was clear. I should step in with financial support. I maintained my calm demeanor. "I think you two should live within your means," I replied gently. "That's what Robert and I always did, and it served us well." "But surely there must be something from Robert's company sale," Allison pressed. "Matthew mentioned his father sold the business before he passed." Matthew looked uncomfortable. "Allison, we've talked about this. Whatever Dad left went mostly to Mom for her retirement and future needs." The conversation moved on, but the tension lingered. Over the following weeks, the pressure increased. Matthew began calling more frequently with casual questions about my financial situation. "Mom, I was just wondering, did Dad leave anything specifically for home purchasing?" he asked during one call. "Allison found another place we love, but the down payment is substantial." I maintained the story that Robert had left enough for my comfortable retirement and some money for Matthew's future, but nothing that would support the lifestyle Allison envisioned. I offered to help with a reasonable down payment on a starter home in a good but not extravagant neighborhood, which was met with barely concealed disappointment. As the weeks passed, I noticed Matthew calling less frequently. When we did speak, he seemed distracted and sometimes defensive. A rift was growing between us, engineered by expectations I had no intention of fulfilling. It was painful, but I reminded myself that protecting my son sometimes meant being the villain in his story, at least temporarily. Almost exactly 3 weeks after the wedding, I was tending to my garden when a luxury SUV I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. Allison stepped out wearing designer sunglasses and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my entire outfit. This was the first time she had come to see me without Matthew. "Allison, what a surprise," I said, removing my gardening gloves. "Matthew didn't mention you were stopping by." "This is just between us girls," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Do you have time for coffee?" In the kitchen, I prepared coffee while maintaining casual conversation about their honeymoon and settling into married life. Once we were seated at my dining table, however, Allison's demeanor changed. The polished charm fell away like a mask removed after a long performance. "Let's stop dancing around the subject, Jewel," she said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "I know Robert's company was worth millions when he sold it. Matthew might be in the dark, but I've done my research." I kept my expression neutral. "Robert's company provided well for us, yes." "Well," she scoffed. "Cybersecurity firms were selling for tens of millions back then. Don't treat me like I'm stupid." "I'm not sure what you're implying, Allison." "I'm not implying anything. I'm saying directly that you're hoarding family money that should be shared." Her eyes narrowed. "Matthew is Robert's son. He deserves his inheritance now, not whenever you decide to dole it out." I took a slow sip of my coffee, buying time to compose my response. "Robert left provisions in his will for Matthew's future. Most of what he left is earmarked for my retirement and eventually for charitable causes we both believed in." "That's convenient," Allison replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Keep it all for yourself while your son struggles to establish the life he deserves." "Is that what Robert would have wanted?" "Robert and I discussed our finances extensively," I said firmly. "He trusted my judgment about how to support Matthew in ways that would truly benefit him." Allison leaned forward, dropping all pretense of politeness. "Here's what I think. I think you're sitting on a fortune while playing middle-class grandma in your gardening clothes. I think you're being selfish and controlling." "I'm sorry you feel that way," I responded, maintaining my composure though my heart was racing. "You know," she continued, "Matthew already feels like you don't support his choices. It wouldn't take much to convince him you never approved of me, that you're trying to punish him by withholding his inheritance. Is that really the relationship you want with your only child?" The threat was unmistakable. I felt a chill despite the warm spring day. "Allison, I love my son unconditionally," I said, "but I won't be manipulated or threatened in my own home. Robert's estate is being managed exactly as he intended." She opened her mouth to respond when her phone rang. Glancing at the screen, her expression instantly transformed back into the sweet daughter-in-law I had come to know. "Hi, honey," she answered, her voice honey-sweet. "Just having coffee with your mom. We're having such a nice chat." After a brief conversation with Matthew, she ended the call and stood up. "I should get going. Thanks for the coffee, Jewel." At the door, she paused and turned back to me. "Think about what I said. Family should take care of family. Don't you agree?" After she left, I sat in my kitchen, hands shaking slightly. The mask had finally dropped completely, confirming every suspicion I'd had. That night, I barely slept, wrestling with how best to protect Matthew without alienating him further. I knew that if I told him about this conversation, Allison would deny everything or twist my words to make me appear jealous or controlling. I needed more than just my word against hers. I needed irrefutable evidence of who Allison really was before her claws sank any deeper into my son's life and finances. The morning after Allison's visit, I contacted the private investigator again and authorized a more comprehensive background check. Money was no object, I told him. I needed to know everything about Allison Porter, now Allison Davis. 5 days later, a thick envelope arrived at my home by courier. Inside was a detailed report that made my blood run cold. The investigator had been thorough, uncovering information that painted a disturbing picture of the woman my son had married. Allison had been married before a fact she had never mentioned to Matthew or me. Her first husband, James Whitaker, was a wealthy real estate developer, 30 years her senior. They had married when she was 24 and divorced just 2 years later. The divorce settlement had been substantial, but according to financial records, Allison had burned through most of it within 18 months. Her spending habits were alarming. Multiple maxed-out credit cards, unpaid loans, and a pattern of living far beyond her means. There were collection notices from luxury retailers and evidence she had borrowed money from friends without repaying it. Most concerning were the legal troubles. 3 years before meeting Matthew, Allison had been charged with fraud for opening credit accounts in her roommate's name. The charges had eventually been dropped when she agreed to repayment, but the pattern was clear. The investigator had also uncovered text messages and emails to friends where Allison explicitly discussed targeting wealthy men and strategies for securing the bag. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by these documents, feeling physically ill. My sweet, trusting son had married a predator. The question now was what to do with this information. If I confronted Matthew directly, he might reject the evidence out of loyalty to his new wife. But if I did nothing, I feared he would be financially and emotionally devastated. After careful consideration, I called Thomas Jenkins, the lawyer who had handled Robert's estate and had been a close friend of our family for decades. "Thomas, I need your advice," I explained. "It's about Matthew and his new wife." I met Thomas at his office that afternoon and shared everything: the investigation results, Allison's confrontation, and my fears for Matthew's future. "This is certainly concerning Jewel," Thomas said, reviewing the documents. "But Matthew is an adult who made his choice. We need to respect his agency while also protecting his interests. What can I do?" I asked, feeling helpless. "We can take steps to protect the inheritance without directly confronting the situation," Thomas explained. "Robert's will already specified that Matthew's portion would be held until he turns 35, but we can add additional protections." We spent the next 2 hours discussing options. Ultimately, we decided to create an irrevocable trust for Matthew's inheritance with specific conditions. The money would still become available to him at 35, but with provisions that would protect it from divorce settlements and restrictions that would prevent rapid depletion. Thomas assured me this was in line with Robert's intentions and would stand up to legal challenges. "What about Matthew?" I asked. "Do I show him this information about Allison?" Thomas considered carefully. "In my professional opinion, he needs to know, but prepare yourself for his reaction. He may not be ready to accept the truth." That evening, I called Matthew and asked him to come over alone the next day. I told him it was important that it concerned his father's estate. He agreed, though he sounded hesitant. When he arrived, I had organized the investigators' findings into a clear presentation. I started gently explaining my concerns and why I had felt compelled to dig deeper into Allison's background. Then, I showed him everything: the previous marriage, the financial problems, the fraud charges, and the damning messages about targeting wealthy men. Matthew's face went through a range of emotions as he read the documents: disbelief, confusion, anger, and finally, a devastating hurt that broke my heart to witness. "This can't be real," he said, his voice barely audible. "She would have told me about being married before. She would have explained." "I'm so sorry, Matthew," I said, reaching for his hand. "I wish none of this were true." Suddenly, his expression hardened. He stood up, pushing the papers away. "No, this is just another attempt to control me," he said, his voice rising. "You never wanted me to marry her. You've been looking for reasons to discredit her from the beginning." "That's not true," I protested. "I only want what's best for you." "What's best for me?" he shouted. "Or what's most convenient for you. Maybe you just can't stand the idea of me having someone else in my life. Someone whose opinion matters more than yours." "Matthew, please," I began, but he cut me off. "Did Dad even leave anything for me? Or was that a lie too? Are you keeping everything for yourself, like Allison said?" The accusation stung deeply. "Your father loved you more than anything. Everything we've done has been to protect you." "I don't need your protection. I need your respect," he snapped, gathering his coat. "Don't contact me or Allison. We're done here." He stormed out, leaving me alone with the scattered evidence of Allison's deception. I heard his car start and drive away, the tires screeching on the pavement. Through my tears, I prayed I hadn't lost my son forever. The following day, Matthew texted to inform me that he and Allison would be taking space from our relationship. They moved to an apartment across town, and my calls went unanswered. It was the beginning of the most painful period of my life since losing Robert. 2 months passed with almost no contact from Matthew. I sent occasional texts just to let him know I was thinking of him, but received only brief, formal responses. I maintained my routine, volunteering at the community center, tending my garden, and meeting friends for lunch. But the estrangement from my only child cast a shadow over everything. I didn't reach out to Allison or try to force a reconciliation. I trusted that if Matthew was living with her day in and day out, the truth would eventually reveal itself. The investigator continued to monitor the situation discreetly, informing me that Matthew and Allison had been looking at expensive houses and that Allison had recently purchased a new luxury car, putting further strain on their finances. Thomas Jenkins helped me finalize the trust arrangements, ensuring Matthew's inheritance would be protected, regardless of what happened with his marriage. It gave me some peace of mind during this difficult time, knowing that at least his financial future was secure. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning, my phone rang with Matthew's number. My heart leaped as I answered. "Mom," his voice sounded tired, almost broken. "Can we meet somewhere? Just you and me?" We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. When I arrived, Matthew was already there, sitting in a corner booth, staring into an untouched cup of coffee. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes, in a dejected posture I had never seen before. I slid into the seat across from him, resisting the urge to reach out and smooth his rumpled hair like I did when he was a child. "It's good to see you, Matthew." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "Mom, I owe you an apology." "You don't have to," I started, but he shook his head. "Yes, I do. You were right about everything, and I was too blind to see it." He took a deep breath. "Last week, I found credit card statements Allison had been hiding. She's maxed out 3 cards in my name that I didn't even know existed." My heart sank. "Oh, Matthew." "That was just the beginning," he continued. "When I confronted her, she gave this elaborate explanation about surprise gifts and investments. I wanted to believe her, but something felt off. So I started paying attention, checking our accounts, listening more carefully." He described discovering shopping bags hidden in the trunk of her car, expenses that couldn't be accounted for, and secretive phone calls she would take outside their apartment. "Then yesterday, I came home early from work and overheard her on the phone with a friend," he said, his voice cracking. "She was laughing about how she was going to secure the bag from my family and then decide whether to keep me around. She said once she got access to the real money, she might just divorce me and enjoy it on her own." Tears welled in his eyes. "Mom, she never loved me. I was just a path to money. She thought my father left." I reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm so sorry, Matthew." "No, I'm sorry," he insisted. "You tried to warn me. I said horrible things to you, accused you of terrible motives. How can you even look at me right now?" "Because I'm your mother, and I love you," I said simply. "Nothing will ever change that." We talked for hours in that cafe. Matthew explained that he was consulting with a lawyer about an annulment or divorce. He worried about financial entanglements, about how Allison might try to claim part of any inheritance. I assured him that steps had been taken to protect his future. "Dad's estate was always meant for you," I explained carefully. "But he wanted you to establish your own life first, to know your own worth, beyond any inheritance. That's why he stipulated you would receive your portion at 35. Matthew nodded slowly. "Dad always did think long term. I wish I'd inherited more of his wisdom, instead of just expecting his money." When we finally parted, Matthew hugged me tightly. "I don't know what happens next, but I'm glad I still have you." A week later, Matthew called to tell me that Allison had reacted with cold fury when his lawyer presented her with divorce papers and evidence of her financial misconduct. She had demanded to know about the millions from Robert's company sale, insisting she was entitled to a substantial settlement. Matthew asked me to meet with them and their lawyers to clarify the inheritance situation. It was time for complete transparency. In the attorney's conference room, I finally revealed the truth about Robert's estate, explaining that while there was indeed substantial wealth, it was protected in trusts that couldn't be accessed before Matthew turned 35, with provisions specifically designed to protect against divorce settlements. Allison's face contorted with rage. "That can't be legal," she sputtered. "We've been married. I have rights to marital assets." "The trust was established before your marriage," Thomas Jenkins explained calmly. "And given the evidence of fraud and financial misconduct, any judge would uphold these provisions." Realizing she had lost Allison, stormed out shouting accusations and threats. Her lawyer, looking embarrassed, apologized and followed her out. The divorce proceeded quickly. Given the short duration of the marriage and the evidence of Allison's deception, she received only a minimal settlement. Within weeks, she had left Boston entirely, reportedly moving to Florida to start fresh. Matthew moved in with me temporarily, while he sorted out his finances and emotional state. It was a period of healing for both of us, rebuilding our relationship while he recovered from the betrayal. The year following Matthew's divorce was a time of healing and growth for both of us. Matthew started therapy to process the betrayal and understand the patterns that had made him vulnerable to Allison's manipulation. I gave him space when he needed it and support when he asked for it, careful not to say, "I told you so," or diminish his pain in any way. The hardest part, he confided one evening as we sat on the porch swing, isn't even the lies or the money she spent. It's realizing that what I thought was love was just a calculated performance. Every kiss, every laugh, every moment I treasured was just part of her plan. Not everyone is like Allison, I reminded him gently. There are genuine people out there who will love you for yourself. How will I ever trust my judgment again? He wondered. With time and wisdom, I said. Your father used to say that good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. This was painful, but you've learned from it. As Matthew began to heal, he developed a new appreciation for his father's financial wisdom. Robert had built wealth slowly and purposefully, never letting money define his worth or happiness. Matthew started reading the books on financial management that Robert had loved, asking me questions about his father's business decisions and philosophy. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I decided it was time to reveal the full truth about Robert's estate. We sat in Robert's study, surrounded by his books and photographs, and I opened the safe behind his desk. Your father left specific instructions about your inheritance, I explained, showing Matthew the detailed documents. The $53 million was meant to be shared between us, with the bulk eventually going to you and to charities we both believed in. Matthew stared at the numbers in shock. 53 million, I had no idea it was anywhere near that much. Robert was private about finances, even with family sometimes, I said. He believed that knowing about too much money too soon could change a person's path, not always for the better. Instead of anger at having been kept in the dark, Matthew's response surprised me. He was right, he said quietly. If I'd known about this money earlier, I might never have become a teacher. I might have married Allison and lived an empty life of spending and status. Dad knew me better than I knew myself. Together, we reviewed the trust arrangements that would transfer a significant portion of the inheritance to Matthew when he turned 35, now just 3 years away. The protective measures we had added after discovering Allison's true nature would remain in place, ensuring the wealth would support Matthew's goals rather than be squandered. What will you do with it? I asked. Matthew thought for a moment. I want to honor Dad's legacy, maybe establish a scholarship fund for students interested in cybersecurity, and I'd like to support education in underserved communities. I felt Robert's presence in the room as Matthew outlined his ideas, knowing he would have been proud of our son's growth and perspective. As Matthew rebuilt his life, he decided to stay in teaching, but also began volunteering with a financial literacy program for young adults. If I can help one person avoid the mistakes I made, it's worth it, he explained. It was through this volunteer work that Matthew eventually met Sarah, a kind-hearted accountant who shared his values and had her own painful past relationship that had taught her similar lessons. Their connection developed slowly, built on friendship and mutual respect, rather than whirlwind romance. The first time Matthew brought Sarah to dinner at my home, the contrast with Allison couldn't have been more striking. Sarah arrived in a modest car, brought a homemade dessert instead of expensive wine, and showed genuine interest in our family photos and stories. She complimented my garden without asking how much the house was worth and helped clear plates without checking their brand name. Most importantly, when Matthew told her about his family's financial situation, being honest from the beginning, this time her response was perfect. "That's nice, but it doesn't change who you are to me." Now, as I watch Matthew and Sarah build a relationship based on honesty and shared values, I feel profound gratitude for the decision to keep silent about the inheritance when Matthew first introduced Allison. That silence revealed Allison's true character and ultimately protected both Matthew's heart and his future. Robert and I always taught Matthew that money doesn't define a person's worth, but how people react to money often reveals their character. Allison showed us exactly who she was when she thought there was wealth to be gained. Sarah shows us who she is by caring more about Matthew than any inheritance. As for me, I continue to live comfortably, but modestly, supporting causes Robert and I believed in and enjoying the profound blessing of having my son back in my life, wiser and stronger than before. The inheritance that once threatened to tear our family apart will now secure Matthew's future and extend Robert's legacy of helping others. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have revealed the inheritance from the beginning or kept it quiet like I did? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if my story resonated with you. Remember that sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children isn't money, but the wisdom to handle life's challenges with grace and integrity. Thank you for listening to my story.